car company that's been under fire very frequently and recently. So today we're going to make a little bit of a video on them. Just for my fans, I want you to know I don't want to talk about the subject, and you most likely don't want to hear about the subject because it's sad. So, first of all, what is Stellantis? Well, Stellantis is a very big car company that owns a lot of other car companies. Mainly Abarth, Alfa Romeo, Chrysler, Citroën, Dodge, DS Automotive, Fiat, Jeep, Lancia, Maserati, Opel, Peugeot, Ram, Vauxhall, Leasley, and Free2Move. Free2Move is kind of a joke. Anyway, Stellantis owns all of these car companies. So who is the CEO? Because in every single company, for the most part, Tim Cook with Apple, they usually know about all the decisions, right? 3 very good words. Chief Executive Officer. Very fancy words, which means they're like the highest of the company, right? They get to make the decisions, right? There are people that, a board that puts them in and takes them out, but still, right? So who is the CEO of Stellantis, and, what's their deal? So Carlos Tavares is the CEO of Stellantis. He has been working for Stellantis, FSA, and I'll explain that later, since 2014. Now, Carlos Tavares is responsible for the steaming heap that is Stellantis, but another fun fact you may not know about him is he's also responsible for the entire Renault-Nissan thing. You know how Nissan, or Datsun, was really good, and then Renault bought them out, and then they were really bad. That's him. He started working at Renault in 1984, and then later was the president of Nissan North America in 2009. So he was one of the people that was responsible for all that deliciousness cesspool. So this isn't the first time he's done something like this. I don't have a lot of hate for Carlos Tavares. In fact, I think most of this isn't his fault. There have been many, 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 many other CEOs, whether it's Chrysler or Mercedes, past companies that have owned Chrysler in the past, other than him, that have mainly messed this up. But right now, he's the one in charge of cleaning it up. He's not doing a very good job. So, that's just, Stellantis isn't a standard car company. There are actually 2 car companies. PSA, which is a European, mainly European-focused car, right? They own Opel and Vauxhall, both before owned by GM. They also own DS Automotive, Citroën, and Peugeot, which is French. I was thinking of Peugeot because, that's, it's very complicated. Anyway, so PSA and FSA, which is Fiat Chrysler Automotive. Now, if you don't know, Chrysler has had a tricky past. So essentially, what's happening here, Chrysler was before owned by Mercedes. They were owned by Mercedes, and things weren't really going well. It was more of an abusive relationship, originally the deal was, set out because Chrysler needed a buyer. They wanted a buyer, and, Mercedes hadn't really all that much entered into the North American market. They had, but just not as much as they wanted to, right? So they were planning, hey, we're going to enter into the North American market. We need a company that can help us with that. Chrysler was one of the biggest car companies in the North American, automotive division or place or market. So they were definitely very interested in that from that point of view. Also, we can see from, the late 1990s, Mercedes was also interested in economy cars and essentially, which is what all car companies want to do, making things cheaper and making them cost more expensive. So they wanted cheap, dirty shortcuts to how to make their cars cheaper from a cheaper car company, and Chrysler, as it was, quote-unquote, a budget brand, could perfectly help with them. Now, that wasn't a very good relationship. It didn't last very long, and Chrysler would be looking for a buyer, and they ended up getting bought out by Fiat, or Fiat Chrysler Automotive. So Fiat was just Fiat. That was just what they were called. And they owned a few other cars other than Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge, and Ram came along, right? So they, of course, owned many of these other car companies before they purchased Chrysler, Dodge, and Jeep, just because Fiat, believe it or not, is actually a very wealthy, rich car company. Here in the U.S., you know that Fiat's been laughed off the continent multiple times, right? But believe it or not, in Japan, and not in Japan, well, also kind of in Japan, in India, Fiat is very, very popular. I mean very popular. They make a lot of smaller, very affordable cars that people love that are also kind of trendy with the Fiat 500 and stuff like that. So they're more wealthy than you would think. So they bought out Chrysler, Dodge, and Jeep. Now, believe it or not, Chrysler, Jeep, and Dodge, they were hurting, right? This, the recession, all that stuff. They were really hurting at that time. So they were a very big car company, almost the same size as Fiat. Remember, Fiat owned these car companies, and Chrysler owned 2 car companies. So they were pretty much similar in size. Well, 3 if you count Ram, but that's just kind of Dodge. right? So they were very similar in size, but since Chrysler was weakened and Fiat was going strong, Fiat bought Chrysler, and, instead of it being the huge, which is just Fiat remaining Fiat, but also owning Chrysler, they became, merged together. It wasn't a full buyout, it was a merge. Fiat Chrysler Automobiles, just because both of the major brands were major, right? Big. Then, of course, in 2022, 2024, 2022? I'm going to say 2020. Oh, yeah. Yeah. In January 16th, 2021, these two merged. So FCA and PSA, not just because they're both three-letter words and have similar letters in them and also look very similar, just because it kind of worked out, right? FSA they had some European cars, but they were mainly, with Chrysler, Dodge, and Jeep. They take up an entire, letter of the two-letter acronym, and then automobiles is kind of in there. So Chrysler, Dodge, and Jeep and Ram is a big thing, and they were wanting to get more into the European market. PSA was a little bit weak, because remember, Peugeot, Citroën, DS Automotive, Opel, and Vauxhall they were big, but they were just okay, right? So they decided to merge, and that's when they formed the loving turd that is Stellantis. That's how they own all these car companies. Citroën, DS Automotive, Dodge, Maserati, Opel, / Vauxhall, Jeep, Chrysler, Fiat, Peugeot, Lancia, Alfa Romeo, Abarth, and Ram. That's how they own all these car companies. They're, number one, 3 big, gigantic, conglomerate car companies, and then, 2 gigantic ones merged together. So that's why Stellantis is so big. So exactly what's going on with them and why are they, in hot water right now? First thing is the dealers. Essentially, Stellantis is pushing hard towards EVs. We've seen these car companies in the past be, starstruck with EV technology and thinking it's the best thing out there. Stellantis is one of those car companies. They went head and over heels over this project, and they went all in EV. And that's been very bad, because I'm just, my old cars made so many videos about this that if I started talking about it, I'm sure you'd slap my head off. But essentially, Chrysler does this thing where they come out with a great thing like the K cars or the Cloud cars. Their stock goes up, they do something bad, and then it plummets. And, when FSA, PSA merger, entire thing happened, FSA hadn't been doing a whole lot with Fiat and Chrysler despite the name. So, essentially, the brand was down, right? They were on the downfall. They only had 3 vehicles, which was the 300, the Pacifica, and the Pacific. Well, yeah, 2 vehicles. And they weren't looking great, right? So when this merger happened, they wanted to focus on EVs, and they never ended up coming out with new vehicles, which left the brands just dying. All they sell is minivans. They don't make the 300s anymore, so the brands are in a very sad and pathetic state. So pathetic, in fact, that they're keeping the 300 on their website, even though it's technically not for sale. And dealers have just been frustrated with this, right? Stellantis is a very hard company to work with, according to dealers. They're very hard to, Stellantis essentially says to the dealers, we know these cars don't sell. We know no one wants these cars anyway, but if you fail, it's your fault. And that's how Stellantis is taking this entire thing, right? The UAW, the United Auto Workers, is of course noticing this. They're a union group, and they're of course, lighting a fire under Stellantis to possibly make the situation worse if they do anything else. Stellantis' sales have also been down. If you look at, quarter 2 from 2024 versus quarter 2 from 2023, that's a 21% drop, which is a lot. And remember, this isn't just, the typical Chrysler thing, because when Chrysler goes down, that's expected, right? That's usually pretty normal. But Stellantis, with all these car companies, and yet there's still a net negative, that's scary. That's some pretty terrifying stuff, especially for the economy and so much stuff like that. Stellantis' stock is also, again, it does this, just sometimes it loves to plummet. If you look over the max, yes, they are up. 5 years they're up, and then 1 year, it's just been a total, they were doing kind of good there, and then, and especially that big dip right there, big dip right there, a little dip right there, and then big dip right there. You can just see how the car company's doing. Not all that well. Another thing is that Stellantis has made, tries. They've been trying. They really, pushed as hard as they could, and they tried something. They tried to come out with 2 new vehicles, right? Maserati, no, not Maserati. Is it Maserati? Maserati. I need to look at the logo. Logo. Maserati. No, it's not Maserati. It's the fancy one. Alfa Romeo. Alfa Romeo and Dodge were really one of the ones hit the hardest, because Alfa Romeo in 2015, they came back to North America after not being here for a while, and they were really hurting because, remember, they've been here since 2015, and they were supposed to be competing with all the other brands. All the other brands got really good really quickly to compete with Alfa Romeo, and then Alfa Romeo was at the bottom of the barrel. So Stellantis tried to help them out, and then Dodge just wasn't Dodge anymore. Their two best cars had been canceled, so Stellantis needed to put, a wedge where they used to be. And they came out with the Dodge Hornet and Alfa Romeo Tonsils. And they're not bad cars, they're just bad cars. Like, objectively, which this channel is about a lot of objective things, right? A lot of car reviewers like to review, sports cars and talk about how great stuff that is. I like consumer cars. I think they're just cooler in general and more practical. That's what this channel is all about. And yet I don't like this. Essentially, you can just tell it's a cheap ploy. It's just a cheap thing that they just cooked up. It's not a very Dodge and or, Alfa Romeo style, because it's just, crap. It's just corporate crap. That's all this is. It's just them trying their best, throwing their hat in the ring. This is officially the slowest car yet. People's slowest selling car. Again, maybe why those dealerships are not very happy with them. Another thing is Chrysler. Chrysler is the main brand. If you know, Chrysler, Dodge, and Jeep. Jeep is like the off-road, the sporty, the cool one, right? Dodge is the budget, but remember, like I said, budget brands, they either go for like value in terms of they pretend like they're luxury or are luxurious, like Mazda, or sportiness, right? Like, the Civic with the SI, or they're like Toyota and they just don't care. Dodge has always been the sportier type, so, they need to have sporty things, which is why we got this. So Chrysler. Chrysler's always been the main brand. Even though Dodge used to sell more than Chrysler did, Chrysler's always been like the centerfold, right? Let's say Scion sold more cars than Toyota. That doesn't mean they're the main brand. Toyota's still the main brand. You know what I mean? So Chrysler, the staple main brand, they only have two cars, and this is pathetic. So Stellantis has come out with an air quotes 10-year plan. A 10-year plan to revive all these brands. This was one of the agreements between the merger, FSA would get on top of it a little bit more and rescue these brands, right? Because they didn't want to, PSA didn't want to inherit all this baggage. And so they ended up doing this. Essentially, all we've heard from Stellantis is bullshit. We've discarding the Chrysler Airflow. The Chrysler Airflow, it's a bad idea, but it's real and it's actually happening and actually real. This crap. You may have seen this, the Sebring's coming back, the 200's coming, the 300's coming back in EV form. This is all we've gotten from them. Just absolute vaporware, right? If you think Toyota's water engine is just corporate garbage, think about this. I don't know how many articles I've written about how the Sebring is coming back as an EV. It's not, right? We haven't heard anything about Stellantis ever since the Airflow came out. And the Airflow concept, remember, not in production, came out in like 2021. And yet we have not heard anything. And the Airflow is still not in production. So, chirps. Not even chirps. We just heard nothing. There's no craze. There's nothing. Another thing, the cars that Stellantis does make, which is the Jeep plugins, the Pacifica is not affected, from what I've heard. They also stink, because they're also being recalled, which is amazing. So, to put it all into perspective, Stellantis is making cars for no one, that no one wants, that are objectively bad and being recalled, and forcing dealerships to sell them that don't want to sell them. It's not great. Another thing, there is hope. There is very much hope, right? Again, you can just see here, in 2026, I keep on calling Chrysler Traveras, and that leaves me a bad taste in my mouth. Carlos Traveras, his contract expires, and they're finding someone new. Thank God. Again, this is another thing. They've been closing factories left and right to save their own rear end. I don't know. I swear sometimes and then I don't. To save their own rear end, they've been closing factories, which is bad, and they have just not been reopening them. Sticker prices have been shooting up. Executive departures. Literally everyone is jumping off the boat, and then high inventory. They just won't not stop making these stupid cars. And then this is the weirdest thing about Stellantis. If a car isn't selling for Toyota, they'll just stop making it. Chrysler will be like, yeah, come on, make more of them, come on. If we have enough of them, they'll want to buy them. And they don't want to buy them. And then they just start closing factories when they realize that they don't have enough money to make these stupid cars in the first place. So with that, thank you for watching. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. And this is probably the saddest thing I've talked about.